Okay, so I was asked by a few people to explain a little bit more about some of the work that I'm now doing with Vedic astrology, Jyotish astrology. And so I felt it was easy to do a video because that way the video can always get sent to people that are curious and probably a little easier to explain things over video. So the first thing is doing a timing charting for people. So when I'm looking at timing, it's so key. So any really strong, important event that happens for two people sets a motion of a connection of how those two people will relate based on that day and the principles of that day. So if it's a first date, if it's the first time you have sex, if it's the first time you get engaged or you do a public announcement about being a couple, if it is when you first get married, every time those pieces happen, it actually sets a new chart in motion and it solidifies a new foundation to your connection. So it overrides what's happened previously. And I think it's a really key piece because you hear this happen or you hear this said over and over again where people get married and then soon after it's like there's this whole piece where people are like, I don't understand what happened. I took one person to get married and I feel like I walked away with somebody totally different. So this is not uncommon. So what happens is on the day that you get married, you actually infuse a stamp onto your connection. So everything that's related to your connection will have this infused piece on it. And so some of the things that I'm looking for when I do the analysis, it's quite involved, but I wanted to try to explain a little bit of what I'm looking for and what is involved in doing a chart analysis for a very specific day. So first of all, the day of the week has a very important piece. And it's interesting because a lot of people will get married on a Saturday, and Saturdays actually cast in the energy of Saturn. So it brings in more of a shadow energy into a relationship. Now, that being said, there are some very specific times, typically, not all the time, that can happen on very certain days where you can actually oversee what's happening. So a lot of people I know look for Saturday weddings, and it's such a commonplace piece. And if that window is available during that day, it can actually nil and void some of the properties and the qualities of that day. But typically the day of the week is very key for looking at that first piece just right off the top. Some of the other elements that I'm looking for is if there's a planetary war that day, if there is a dark moon, if there is a conjunction of malefic planets in very specific positions, if eighth house, which is the house of death, and it's the house of it can be the house of affairs, it can be the house of like hidden secrets, it can be the house of very deep undertakings, but typically it's not something you want to cast onto a relationship. It is a very deep house if it's utilized in a certain way, but typically for things related to relationship, you want to be really supporting your relationship with other factors that strengthen the relationship. Also looking for what's called hemming, where certain planets will cause influence in certain directions or certain places. Looking for benefics, so really positive planets to be in very specific places that then open up and bring in almost like a blessing, a very powerful blessing onto the connection and onto the relationship moving forward. There are pieces called the TT, which is related to the moon as well. There's very specific days where it is inauspicious. So it basically creates more of a void that happens, and it's not an energy that you want to be bringing into a day that of something that really is meaningful and very powerful in the connection you're creating, because that imprint is like a stamp, and so it will infuse that energy moving forward into your relationship, and it will continue to have that energy connected and involved for how your relationship unfolds for the length of time. So if it has positive, benefic energies and influences, it's like creating like a beautiful blessing and like lining it in a positive encasing so that the relationship can really move forward and with a lot of strength. So those are a couple of the keynotes. Yeah, basically, if you do choose a really, really strong day, it's going to create success. It's going to create a powerful influence. And, we see this so often, and we don't always necessarily equate like sort of the esoteric or the hidden sciences that are going on behind when relationships derail or something takes place, and you just see a connection shift. And being able to get deeper into the principles and the reasons is very, very powerful. And then the other thing that I've been being asked about is there's a few things I'm very passionate about deep and psychological understandings and Jyotish understanding. So Jyotish is it's the one of the deepest forms of astrological cosmological study that you can do. And it's very involved. And the reason it's very involved is it's just so webbed in wisdom. And it does take a long time of study to really understand these principles and understand how to utilize them. So it's definitely not something that is easy to sort of, turn over very quickly. I know I've been studying for about 10 years and I'll be studying the rest of my life. So the other piece that people have been asking about has been synergy charting. And so I have a 17-page protocol that I go through that has been brought forward from one of the teachers I have studied under, very evolved teacher that he's definitely a master in his trade for sure. And I'm very thankful for the protocol list that he has created to walk all the different components through to see exactly what's happening in the combination of two people. So I'll just explain a little bit of what that looks like. So the first one is called the core connection. So it's when we think of like a table or we think of a chair, it's like those four pieces that stabilize that chair or that table, those four legs are the foundation that allows a relationship or allows a connection to have stability. And so those four pieces are the first starting point that I look into, and it's how it's called the lugnas, how the ascending houses combine, how the sun positions combine, the moon positions combine, the Venuses, and the lugna lords. So I won't go too deep into trying to explain these things too much because it might get confusing, but basically it's seeing the structure of the first portion of how the connection comes together. Then it goes into what's called the Rashi rule, and that's starting to get into how certain planets are in relationship to each other. So how we're connected to the imprint of the time frame that we were born, how those two are in relationship. Some have beautiful blended relationships, and some have activated, whether it be conscious or whether it be more subconscious, enemy connections, or sometimes they're neutral. But we get to see what that kind of connection looks like. And in the long run, what that type of connection will bring. And also there's solutions, remedies, what's called Vastu remedies that can get applied as well. If there are if two people really want to be together, but it just feels like there's struggle or conflict in certain areas, what this does is it brings that highlight up to the surface. You can see what's taking place, and then it also gives the ability to find out ways to actually neutralize where there are issues going on and how to actually create almost like a blend to move through where that struggle is, so that you can move around those obstacles or create a positive piece within the obstacle to actually transform the obstacle. Then there's called hidden strengths and weaknesses. And so this is very much where we get to see how the relationship will be supported by two people, or if it's going to create weakness in certain areas. So again, it's very specific. These are all calculated positions. So it brings that information to awareness. Then we have soulmate indicators. So are there soulmate principles that are actually driving two people together? And we get to see, because sometimes there can be a pull with two people to come together, but it actually ends up creating issue because there's karma that's involved in the connection that isn't necessarily supporting the big picture, but it's pulling two people together. So being able to differentiate those pieces. karmic glue. And so that gets very specific to see what kind of past lives are involved in the connection. Who you will be to each other. So it shows like, is this going to be a romantic relationship? Is this going to support your careers? Is this going to support children? Is this going to support higher wisdom and higher knowledge? So all these different pieces can really be seen very strong with who you're going to be to each other. Parallels are where you get into calculating things. We have a longitude and a latitude of how things are calculated. So it's another form of a calculation that gets deeper into understanding your connection. Something that's called the fate principles, and it's the Veda and the Raju. And so these are really important to look for because it can create codependency and it can create a locking in that doesn't actually support two people. So it's very specific when you see that come up in a connection. It's working with what's called the lunar mansion. So influences that come down into the planets that influence the structure of our being and how we relate. So that's very, very important to be able to recognize and to see. Mutual purpose. So it's called Mahendra. And so that is where you get to see what's the purpose of your connection and are both people on track with a similar purpose in this life. Stradega, which is basically hustle and flow. And it's the way that the alignment of the nakshatras are coming together with two people. Try not to get too technical and jargony. Devotion. So Vashya comes up, which is where we get to see if two people are just going to naturally have this automatic devotion to another person. And it can be really helpful if you know someone and you're really attracted, but you don't really know very much about them, but you would like to just get a better snapshot of like what your connection would look like together. Because sometimes we're drawn to somebody because there's karma and it's like a magnet, but is that going to be a supportive piece in the long run? Or is it helpful to understand the deeper picture of what your connection really looks like? So that's very helpful just to get, a deeper understanding of the truth of a connection. So devotion, Vashya, it's like just being so devoted to another person that there's no separation behind like how you want to show up for that person. It's just so automatic. And it's like an attracting force that's really, really strong. Deadly combinations. You don't see these very often, but there are some combinations where if two people come together and they solidify a connection, sometimes it can instigate illness. It can instigate both parties, ending up in some kind of a tragic situation, sometimes death. So it is helpful to know these pieces. Again, they're not very common. It can also instigate whether you're going to have female children or male children, whether it's going to bring in happiness. So this is a very strong piece. And again, this is where remedies can come in. So I just always know that there's a solution to every problem. And so it's not about denoting or casting a negative piece, but it's very much about supporting and strengthening how a connection will look so that there's actually an ability for something to move forward in a very positive and powerful way. The Rashi Adipati, which is mutual affinity. So how's the affinity between certain connections looking? How are the placements looking? And is that going to be strong? The pulse of life, which is called the Nadi. And that's where we get to see, like, will a connection bring in health into the connection of two people? Or will it actually weaken one person, both people, or strengthen both people in a connection? So this is getting into some of the Ayurvedic principles that come into play to understand different dosha principles. And so that's our composition, the way that our system is structured. Is it going to strengthen and support two people, or will one person get really depleted in a connection? Intense balance called Kuja dosha. And so this is where we get to see where the influence of Mars comes into play. So you want to have, typically in a really strong relationship, two people having similar levels of Mars influence. So Mars influence can bring in a lot of passion. It can bring in a lot of strength. If it's really unbalanced between two people, you usually want to have a pretty balanced combination. It can really deplete one of the people, one of the persons, whoever has a weaker constitution towards Mars, who doesn't have a strong Kuja dosha. If you're with somebody who has strong Kuja dosha, one, your sexual chemistry could be really out of balance. Your willpower and strength to do things and sort of your activity levels could be out of balance. It could also create more arguments and fighting if there's more explosive qualities and it's not balanced out between two people. So very important to have that be, really stabilized. The Ghana, which is referenced as sort of like, what's your tribe? So being able to see what's your natural tribe that you're coming into this connection with in your own personal life with, to understand yourself more and then to understand a partner. Animal magnetism, this is referenced as the yoni combination. So this is where you get to see, so there's animals that are interconnected and interwoven into being able to see the different nakshatras, those lunar mansions. So, so basically we get to see on this level, how do the moons come together? How do the lagnas come together? So it's your ascendant, how your Venus has come together, how your Mars has come together, and is there strength in those areas? In like any relationship, there's always going to be areas for growth and learning, but are the main foundations strong? And you'll be able to see right away, like, okay, how is the sexual chemistry going to be? Or how, like, when two people, come into each other's presences, like, do they like move in the same way? Do they cuddle in the same way? Does it feel like it's like there's a blending of the ways that those two people are in operation? That's when you look at your lugna. So looking at the ascendant, is that a match? Is that a blend? And is that strong? So very, very, very powerful to know this ahead of time. And then timing's a core piece. So there's something that's called Samadasha. And so what this is we have different periods of learning that we go through. And so it's kind of like when you see somebody just totally shift, it's like they're studying one thing for a very long time and they go into a certain career. And then it's like they do a 360 and they go in a totally different direction. It's like, well, what happened there? The lessons and the teachings that are happening during different periods of time. So sometimes it could be a 7-year period, sometimes it could be like a 19-year period. There's certain influences that are coming in. And if two people are under those same influences, it creates a bond and a structure and a connection between those two people. And it's also an easier life walk. So it's like you're both like anchoring your energy and your arrow in the same direction. You're both looking at life in the same way, or you're going through the same life lessons. You're interested in the same things. There's just like this structural piece that just takes you in that direction, which is very powerful. And that all has to do with timing and looking at the structure of timing. And then there's a couple core pieces that go into some of the very, very ancient formulations of doing calculations, and it's where we call looking for each other's handicaps. And so where are we weak and where do we have areas to work on? And when we know those areas, it creates a lot of help in being able to really choose how we show up or where our natural weaknesses are going to be, so we have the ability to make different decisions. And so there's a whole portion that really goes through the strengthening of learning how to see where your handicaps are and the areas where you're naturally just a little bit weaker and where a partner would be weaker. And also being able to see, like, if one person's very, very strong, and it's like they can almost go into a relationship with anyone and they're going to be really strong in relationship with anyone. They're just going to bring in that power and that influence in a really strong way. They can also offset somebody who has a lot of debilitations. And so this is so helpful to know ahead of time, and also like almost responsibility. Like when we think about being in a connection or being in a relationship, what's the responsibility of like what we do to bring forward different things into a connection, how we support, how we connect, and being dedicated to the choice of supporting two people to be together in connection. There's a responsibility on, in certain degrees and certain ways to, really want to put the best foot forward in the best ways. So that breaks down those pieces. Relating skills, karmic outlook, being able to see what's the karmic outlook of how somebody views things or how the personality has been formed in certain ways. And then it gets into sexual chemistry. So there's a whole piece about breaking down sexual chemistry. And typically it's good to have like a healthy level of sexual chemistry. If it's over the top, and there's certain combinations that bring this, like a Venus and Pluto conjunction. If it's in certain placements, would be called like a 5-9 position. 7-7-1-1, where it overlaps on top of another person. It can bring in a very powerful connection, but it can also almost become obsessive, and it doesn't bring in the strength for a long-term connection. Like it's good to have a good, healthy level of sexual chemistry without it being too low that there isn't a strength, and without it being over the top where it's just like there's just an inability to function. So this breaks down those pieces as well of getting clear around those areas. And also to just be able to see like there's a whole portion where you get to see like how much chemistry is there and how much karma is there. So, okay, so I feel like that breaks that down to understand a little bit more about what those two pieces are that I'm offering. And if you have questions, please reach out to me. So for timing charting, I charge $150. And for the synergy charting for the month of June, for the rest of June, and for July, I'm going to be charging $350 for the 17-page list. Yes, I'm just still off the hop with having finished my studies. And so I want to offer this for a period of time, at a very decent rate. So, all right. So you can always reach out to me at www.katiatcaven.com, or email me at info@katiatcaven.com, and that is CATAYATCAVEN. All right. Or on social media, just message me. Okay. Thank you so much. And I look forward to answering further questions if it created more confusion. Okay, thank you and many blessings.